Okay. Do you want to read, Dennis?
Sure. Let me pull that up. All right. The question about fasting. The disciples of John and the Pharisees were accustomed to fast. People came to him and objected. Why do the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus answered them, can the wedding feast, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast on that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunken cloth onto an old cloak. If he does, the fullness pulls away the new from the old, and the tear gets worse. Likewise, no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the skins are ruined. Rather, new wine is poured into fresh wineskins. The disciples and the Sabbath. As he was passing through a field of grain on the Sabbath, his disciples began to make a path while picking the heads of grain. At this, the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "Have you never read of what David did when he was in need and he and his companions were hungry? How they went into the house of God where Abiathar the high priest and ate the bread of offering that only the priest could lawfully eat, and shared it with his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That is why the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
Okay. Reflection time. Let's get yours.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one thing, and actually, I kind of got, this, insight actually from our priest in church, like, with, this reading was, and I think even in like the Old Testament reading, it was the gospel where Jacob kind Jacob and his mother Rebecca like kind of like took advantage and stole the birthright and the blessing from Esau, and there's always like this concept of you can always be replaced, and there's always this concept of don't get too comfortable, because someone that with that is more hungry for God's love can take it away. So we know that the Pharisees are, they're kind of smug, and they're, happy, and they feel like that they're, following the law. But, and they believe that, they have the law figured out. And then, of course, Jesus, comes along and, for lack of a better term, shakes things up, and allows uh, allows his people to eat on the Sabbath. How come they do work on the Sabbath, even if it is for healing? And then he basically says no one sews a piece of unshrunken cloth on an old cloak. And he's sort of saying that the Pharisees are stuck on their old ways, and they're getting sort of smug in the fact of the law and just simply the words of the law, and not the spirit, behind the law, and they're, and also, Jesus, in the previous, section, basically was with the tax collectors, the sinners, the lower people of society. So these are the people that are hungrier, the, the sick that need the doctor, the people that are more hungry for God's word, and not necessarily the uh not necessarily the Pharisees. And then the fact that, you know the Sabbath was made for man, and because, I mean, Jesus is pointing out, their, hypocrisy of, when, David on the Sabbath, had to, eat when he was in need. So we know, that the Pharisees, I mean, they were also, guilty of sin, despite the fact that, they were haughty, and they, you know, they put this, uh, I guess, facade that they were holy, um, and Jesus again, kind of, shows that who's hungry for me, who really wants to get my attention. So, I mean, this is why, he says the Sabbath, was made for man to worship him, and not necessarily man to worship the Sabbath, worship, the laws, that you do on the Sabbath. Those are my thoughts here.
Okay. So I was thinking of one thing because of the theme that we started. It's sad that Alol is not there to give us the history or something more in depth than what we know, or I know at least. But I'm going back, this thought coming, why is Mark writing this? Because he's basically giving a very good description of multiple events where there's a conflict between the Pharisees and what Jesus is doing, right? And they are pointing out, well, this is unlawful, and he's pointing out, well, I'm God. And you're not recognizing me. So I get, and when we think about what to whom Mark was writing, we talked about that he was writing to the Gentiles. So the Gentiles did not like Jews, like they were separated. Jesus is a Jew from them. But so what would have separated would have been these Pharisees. There would have been a conflict between the people of law of the Jews, the people who uphold the law of the Jews versus the Gentiles. And Jesus, so basically, probably I'm just thinking Mark is probably number one projecting that Jesus is different from the Jews that these Gentiles would have encountered, is kind of trying to say, go out of your way, reach out. And whom do you reach out? You can see that Jesus is reaching out to somebody in need, and somebody who has difficulty, somebody who has a problem, and is somebody who needs healing. He's not, and he's trying to take away that, the norm. In this case, it's the Sabbath as the central point, that like there's a special day for God. You can't do anything other than the rituals that are laid out, right? Like, and therefore you got to wait out of the Sabbath in order to do anything. Even picking a grain, even picking some grains off as you walk is considered like a sin or something unlawful. So that's one thing that I am thinking why Mark is writing, and even why Jesus is even, like intentionally, probably intentionally doing this, because he's trying to lead the Jews to understand. And he comes to that point that Man was not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man means, like I was thinking about, we have so many days in the week where we work, right? So when Adam and Eve were sent out, they were sent out to toil, and this toil would have happened throughout, because they had to fetch for themselves and to feed themselves. They needed to go out and work. We do the same, you know. But the Sabbath was made in order for, like, yeah, but you have to center your focus on God. So work for the 6 days, but on the seventh day, sit actually must have been the first day. Like, I don't think it's the seventh day, I think it's the first day, that you would give everything to God, that you would sit down and pray and worship and sit with everybody, and and God would be the central focus. And but God also preaches about love, and God also preaches about helping your neighbor. So in these two circumstances, you have there's a need. Like there is that need, or somebody in need, and as a Christian, we are supposed to reach out. And Jesus is telling that. I was thinking today about the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? Wherein this injured man is lying on the wayside, and the priest walks by because he's getting to his homily, right? Like, he's going to this church. So he does not attend to the man. He walks past him because his intention is, I'm doing something, and I that is important, and this is secondary, or somebody else will take care. But Jesus is telling, no, no, this is important. Like, somebody is injured, somebody needs healing, somebody needs your understanding. So that's one point. The second is the fact that they are not recognizing God in Jesus, and they're constantly conflicting with him, trying to show him, trying to, so not opening their eyes, not opening their hearts, and recognizing that he's God in spite of the miracles that are happening around them, in spite of the healing that is happening around them. And therefore, he is telling them the basic truth that when God is with you, you need to celebrate.
Yeah.
So the culmination of the worship, the consecration, is a celebration where God comes alive and you celebrate at that point of time. And in this case, God as Son of Man is right there in their midst. So you need to celebrate. It is time for celebrations. And the fasting will happen when He's gone away. When God is not there, of course, you need to fast as a feeling that you're missing God, or missing God and telling God that we love Him. And that's a way by which we do that. And so that we, like when somebody goes, we have a sorrow, and we show that sorrow through fasting, or like through prayer and things like that. So that's what I feel Jesus is you know um, coming to the point and telling um, this very specifically, actually pointing out to the Pharisees clearly, um, is probably trying to teach them. They're not getting it. So
Yeah.
that's my reflection. That's my two pennies worth of it.
Yeah.
Today I had a testimony. I have a testimony of this. It came at the right time, this chapter.
Oh,
I don't know whether God intentionally did this. So I don't know whether I told you guys this, that we go to this church wherein like there's a youth church, okay? Like, this is like 3,000 families. It's the mother church of Trumbull, and actually the diocese, anything big in the diocese happens in this church. Okay,
mm,
like because the church where the bishop lives, which is next, which is in the neighboring town, is small. So if there's a large event where people are congregating, it happens in this church. right? So it's so before COVID, it used to be that the altar service used to be both girls and so whenever we came to this church, we always saw that it was girls and boys. And Claire, as part of the school that she was going, which was the same school, got trained as an altar server and she started serving there. And then COVID came, everybody, like everything shut off. And then when we came back, and then the altar serving came back in, and they started training more altar servers, became only boys. And she kept asking, Dad, I want to serve, but Nova was had to be trained, and when we went, and the priest who used to train is a young Romanian priest. He avoided answering the question when Claire can join. So he trained Noah for a long time and then said, okay, when can you, what are the Sundays you're available and things like that, which mass and stuff like that. So when we said, hey, Claire is also available, he was like, no, 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 let's wait about Claire. I'll tell you this, that, and all. And it's gone on for like 6 months, like this question as to
Oh,
why the whole thing changed, right? Um, and then there is this one girl who is probably into college now, and she used to be in high school before, but she serves. So it's not like it's only boys, but this one girl who serves as an altar server once in a while. So it happened 2 days back. I wrote to this priest. I said, I have a real conflict in my mind. My girl keeps asking me this question and I cannot answer this. And so what is the answer? Because the neighboring churches in the same diocese we go to have both people serving.
yeah,
Claire serves in the neighboring in a school church. Where she now goes because we changed this schools and we also
yeah.
serve in that church and she serves. And in fact, they call her for like any funeral masses and all if she's available to go and serve. So I asked him 2 days, no answers, and the answer came today evening. I expected he would not write back, but he wrote back and he said his answer was that, boys need to get closer to God. Okay. And he said that we have a lot of boys in our church, so we do not have a requirement for girls. And he said that churches where there are not many available, people who are available to serve, in such churches, boys will serve, girls will serve. Okay. Where there is a requirement and there's not enough boys available,
Then,
then those churches will allow girls to serve. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking exactly about this passage, the norms versus the spirit of the norms.
right.
That somebody wants to serve and you bring like, oh, this is not the norm, you know?
Right.
So, um, so that was one testimony. I mean, we were reading this and it came to me like straight off, like it was collaborating because we kind of. I also asked. I was a Eucharistic minister, and it all
Hmm.
stopped with COVID, and it never came back in this church because there are three priests, and somehow they come out and start serving. So I said, I'm missing it. So what's happening? And he gave the same reason. He said, you are an ordinary minister, okay? That I am an ordinary minister. Only extraordinary ministers can serve the thing when they are available. But when there are not enough extraordinary minister, which is the priest, any available ordinary
Then
minister,
we'll settle for the ordinary
like,
minister.
oh
Just
man,
like,
you
okay.
just, how do I talk to this guy who is younger than, is like in his 30s? And
Yeah.
he's not the pastor, so I know the pastor. I have a conflict with the pastor. This is the same pastor who kicked out the 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 principal and got into conflict. So I couldn't ask him. So it's like you have been trained by a real. I know who trained you. Kind of. Anyway,
That's funny.
but it kind of feeds into Sabbath is made for man, but man is not. You can't. The spirit of the norms is more important than
Yeah.
the just the rules and regulations and sticking to them, because you know then it becomes like a prison. It becomes like a
Right.
wall kind
Mhm.
of thing. That-
Interesting point.
Okay, I'm still out, but I'll make a quick couple of comments. And so there
Okay,
are
Josh.
two ways to look at it. Yeah, one way is right, as you rightly said. What Jesus wanted everybody to do is follow the Sabbath in spirit. That is, not go to the read between the lines and say this is what you're supposed to do, and anybody who doesn't do it, I criticize. So that was not the point. It was more of Sabbath is about God, is about God's love, God's mercy. So be merciful. You and I don't know what is the situation. Maybe it was a uh, genuine lapse from their side. Let's for the moment think about it. That it was a genuine lapse from the disciples in what they did. Let's uh, look at it that way. But the point was, even if it was right, you and I are not supposed to be nitpicking and say, okay, I follow these rules. Anybody who doesn't follow uh, is wrong. It's completely wrong, and I should be criticizing and judging. So I think that was the spirit, the point Jesus was trying to make. Right? Okay, there is something more than all of this, right? And love and mercy, which you are missing. So you're missing the point there. So that's one way of looking at it. Uh, the other side of it is, and Anthony, because you brought this point, I'm just trying to probably put a different side to it. The instance that you shared, or even let's say it was not Jesus, it was some other uh, leader in that case, right? And going with the disciples, and they did it, and they had done it wrong, right? What Jesus is also saying is, I have the authority to tell, to decide what is right and wrong, uh, and that, in a sense, has been passed on to us also as parents, but it has been passed on to the shepherds whom Jesus uh, appointed. That was the apostles, and that power came to our bishops and the priests and to us. So, in some sense, I'm thinking that probably when these conflicts happen, right, between us and others, right, be it others in our group or others beyond us, that is priests, maybe we should also take a moment to think, maybe that priest is wrong, or maybe there is some point which today I'm not able to understand. So I should be able to see through that and maybe have that mercy and say, okay, maybe there is something that is wrong in the way I'm thinking, or maybe it's the priest is completely wrong, but I should have the capability, the not the capability, but the large-heartedness to say, okay, maybe uh, there is scope for error from my side, and let's give the benefit of the doubt to the other person. And the reason I'm saying this is, uh, uh, you might be aware that in our church in Kerala, right, there is a big fight going on between a set of priests, kind of, we would say, the rebels versus uh, our patriarch, right? And these are on certain points of debate, right? What is the right thing and wrong? And the church is kind of in the we are in a very embarrassing situation where the church is going to be split. So if I look at it that way, maybe both sides are right in their own, right, in the point they're holding to. But we are missing the bigger point. It's not about right and wrong. It's about love and mercy. Are we showing? Is each side showing that love and mercy towards each other? And at the end of the day, who has the authority, right? When Jesus was on earth, Jesus had the authority to say this is right and wrong, and because he is God, no, he had the final authority, and people sense that, right? In Mark itself, we read that Jesus' way of teaching is different because he taught with authority. And when now since Jesus is not there, who are the other people who has been given the authority? So through Pope, then the bishops and so on, right? So when we are in that conflict, probably we should say, okay, as the authority, maybe I may be wrong, but I will bow down to the authority and say, for the sake of Christ, because that authority is alter Christ, right? An image or the person representing Christ. Probably for the sake of Christ, I'll bow down to the authority and leave to God to give the right judgment, right, at the right place and time, and not hold anything against that person. It's difficult because when that situation uh, touches us personally, it's difficult to think that way. When it is not touching us, it's easy to say that, okay, let's forgive, right? But just a differing thought that I thought I should share, especially Anthony, since you shared that experience.
Thank you, George. So the way I looked at it, it's been different if I'd looked at it a couple of years back. So I was thinking of one thing. I'm also a father, no? Like you guys are. So in my home, I have a daughter and a son, right? And I never discriminate. Like even when it is a heavy carriage, something heavy, I wouldn't, I will all I'll give equal opportunity, like a equal opportunity, this thing, who wants to, pick up the burden. I think society has changed. And I think that was also the point why Jesus came, right? They were obeying the laws exactly as it was given to Moses, but things had changed, things had evolved. Those laws were implemented, and people saw that, like that implementation, when it doesn't go perfect, you have to make a slight change, like you have to interpret it in a better way. And and it called for, and therefore it should never become like thorns, like the laws of God cannot be thorns. So I think we also have crisis in our church, right? That because, like the lay people, one thing is participation is going down, everything is going down. It's a different situation if it was great, like things are going well. So it just is one after another. As you encounter the church, you start seeing, I don't see a difference between what was happening there in the Pharisees situation versus what is happening with the church. I accept the point, the hierarchy, but that is a patriarchal hierarchy. Jesus, if you see, Jesus never spoke particularly. Yes, he chose 12 men to be his apostles so that he can pass on his, his teachings, he can train them and things like that. But what was established afterwards with Peter onwards and whatever happened, Jesus was not involved. It is supposed to be the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And the question is, like, where are the women? Didn't Jesus's teaching ever touch women and things like that? For example, even Mary, you don't hear her much, even though she played active role. Why? Because the writers are all men, like, and I always wonder if there were some women writers, how the message of the gospel would have been the same, or, would have been interpreted in a different way. And 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 I think that there needs to be a positive change towards understanding God and his principles. But unfortunately, when you have a patriarchal say, you cannot expect from the powers to be. And I just shared it because, like it connected, but I've reconciled. Basically it said there are no green pastures here, go where you need pastures, like. So I would rather be like, see, here we want to do that, we want to serve, we want to lecture, we want to be, like to go and serve, right? So I think I don't see any fault in what the priest said. Basically laid out the norms clearly and said that, there is no availability in this church. Then if you want, if you're so committed and you want to do something, you got to move to another church congregation where there is a vacuum and you serve, right? So that's the way I see it. But anyway, should we move on, or should we go to the third chapter?
Yeah, maybe we can. I mean, I don't see why not.
Okay, let's
A
do.
little bit of time, at least maybe the first part.
Okay. I don't know if Joe's reached home, but okay. Let me read the first part, okay?
Mhm.
A man with a withered hand. Again, he entered the synagogue. There was a man there who had a withered hand. They watched him closely to see if he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Come up here before us." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save a life rather than to destroy it?" But they remained silent, looking around at them with anger and grieved at their hardness of heart. He said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately took counsel with the Herodians against him to put him to death. So, I mean, again, this is a continuation of a theme, the conflict between Jesus and this. And it goes to the point that they're actually looking to put him to death, for anything that he does. And there can't be a graver, contrast between what he did, wherein he was curing somebody, versus what the Pharisees did, which is, hey, we have the proof that he's breaking the law. Let's find out if we can put him to death. And so it continues with that theme. Mark continues with that theme and Jesus continues with this theme where he's not afraid to question the Pharisees, but they're not liking it. They're not they're not uncomfortable with his questions and would rather have him dead rather than face these questions.
And from the standpoint of the Gentiles and how they would see this, I mean, they probably are shaking their heads at this and and their hardness of heart, their seeming preoccupation with the letter of the law, and the funny thing is, they just the actions of the Pharisees. They watched him closely to see if they would cure him on the Sabbath, so they might accuse him. So the intentionality here is just accusation. I mean, they're not purely looking, really giving Jesus the benefit of the doubt. That they were looking. It's almost like when uh, say a police officer is just like trying to find, like, say something minor that you did wrong, like, oh, you didn't wait three three full seconds, like at the stop sign, before you advanced. I mean, that's the nature of their, and even I mean, if you think about the act, it's more that Jesus, he didn't actually, I mean, if we're talking about the letter of the law, like carried out work, he ordered it, him to stretch out his hand, and then suddenly his hand was healed. So I mean, it's and they're immediately taking counsel on how to put him to death. So yeah, I would say, if you're a Gentile, like not like fully versed in the law, you're looking at this and saying, they're just looking for, to put this man who's, trying to do, something good for society and good for this poor man to death. And so that's my thought on this. Are you available, Jos?
Yeah, I'll just say one point. It was interesting what you said, right? Maybe if they really wanted to guard the law, they could have just said, hey, what you're going to do is wrong, and argued about it instead of, okay, if it's like you know it's wrong, instead of preventing that wrong from happening, you are saying, okay, you're using that against that person, right? You should have at least made an attempt to try and correct that person, which shows that they are very beyond a point where it was not about it's not about what is right and wrong. It's more about how do I put that other person down, which sometimes, when we are in a competitive spirit, we forget the basics, and we sometimes want that the other person to do something, make a mistake, so that we can stand on top of that person, say, okay, I'm right and you're wrong, which I believe sometimes happens with some of us as well.
So I have a question, right? Why did Jesus have to? Couldn't Jesus have a different way of instead of the conflict, right? So couldn't he have done this on a Monday? He would have avoided conflict. The person would have been healed on a Monday. They wouldn't have had a reason, right? I mean, most of the things he could have. Why couldn't he have waited another day? Couldn't he have avoided a conflict? So what's the point in him persistently being in conflict with them about that? I mean, what is it conveying, or what are the writers conveying? Like, because they've picked up that point about the Sabbath very strongly. There's something about the Sabbath that they want to convey. I'm sure Jesus did a lot of miracles on Mondays, Tuesdays, and things like that, where the Pharisees didn't have that particular point uh, of, hey, you're doing something good, different. So maybe they are trying to talk about the Sabbath. Maybe the Sabbath was a problem in that ages, like it had become a problem for the common man. That rules about that day had become, like there were things that happened that day which were insensitive. Like it was like, you're doing a ritual, but actually doing a ritual and not living the word of God. And that had become very clear on the Sabbath day. And and therefore the message of the Sabbath was going out like to the Pharisees, because it seems like Jesus could have just avoided conflict. He could have lived longer, got more people on his side, think practically, why do you need conflict? This happens in our lives also, right? Like, like uh, I need not have asked that priest the question, right? I think I should have just assumed the answer, right? Like I should have just assumed based on my experience that this would be it. I didn't have to even write to him, right? Like, or, think this way.
I think of like, I don't know, like atheists, view of like Christians and how like they're hypocritical that, they'll go to church on Sundays and then they'll go, maybe for like a Sunday lunch and then go out and just be absolutely rude to their server and they kind of ask themselves, well, what happened to what you learned during Sunday Mass and all that? And I think, like kind of in the same way, like, on the Sabbath day, and even Jesus, talks about, constantly in the Old Testament, like how people are haughty, people are, have this air of arrogance that, even when they see someone, in pain, and they just simply say, nope, it's the Sabbath, sorry, I can't help you out. And I think, this is what, the Lord has, gotten sick and tired of, over, the course of, all the Old Testament stories of, and, well, of course, there's always the idol worship, but I mean, in a funny way, like, the function of, following the law of the Sabbath has, like, in a way turned into idol worship, where they're not focusing on God, they're focusing on this idol of, I gotta carry out this, that, this, and this on one day in a week, and I don't care, if it hurts, anyone to carry out that, end. So it's kind of amazing, what, the lengths that, that Jesus does to, prove this, very point that, he, I mean, he's probably had it with, all these, with how just the behavior and the attitude of, the Pharisees.
Also, Mark is connecting passion already in chapter 2. Is if he wrote the story afterwards, and if he's got the narration, he's already hinting to that there won't be a good ending to Jesus already.
Right.
And he's developing that conflict already in top of chapter 2, even though we have we are not even 10% into the gospel. So it's basically, that's another thing, that ultimately the Son of Man would die, and that would happen. So basically it creates that conflict narrative goes alongside the story of, the mercy, the compassion, the love of Christ. There's also this conflict and the passion story developed together um, uh, in this in the gospel. So it's interesting that the build-up, it brings in the conflict straight away between the Pharisees and people who are going to put him to death. And yeah. Okay, we are at 9:27, so
Maybe,
we'll stop here.
I mean, this is probably a good stopping point here.
I'll pause the